All right, learning goal number 3, this is going to be in your next page in your math journal, and it is going to be that you can now solve comparison problems. So earlier you learned about combination problems, and today we're going to focus on a different type of story problem, but now you're going to be comparing two different variables. So this is the vocabulary you'd like to jot down in your notebook. A comparison problem is when you compare two different variables, and they can be stated in two different ways. You can compare either smaller to bigger or bigger to smaller.
Exactly. So for example, Christina Aguilera's closet. We're going to talk about her shoes. She has 750 pairs of shoes. That is a ridiculous number of shoes. We are going to compare her ginormous closet to my closet. I have a whopping 25 pair of shoes. So we are going to compare the bigger to the smaller to the bigger. So for easy math, I went through and divided her 750 into 25, just because 25 is a nice even number. I've got my 25, it's easy, I know there's 4 25s and 100, so easy to do the math. So here's Christina's shoe problem. I call it a problem. She's got a ton of shoes, that's a problem. So if each of these little squares represents, or rectangles represents 25. And then there's my shoe problem, because I don't have enough shoes. So here's my 25, my poor sad little 25. So I'm going to be comparing my little shoe problem to her big one. Her big to my little. Okay? So if you look at this, and I just numbered these quick just so that it's easier for us to see. So there's 30 of these little rectangles here. And again, remember, each of those represents 25. So I have two questions to ask. How many times more shoes does Christina have than me? And how many times less shoes do I have than her? So we're comparing the big to the little to the big. So if I move my little shoes up, I can see that I only take up one of her 30. So she has, if I'm looking at this, she has 30 times as many shoes as me. She's got my shoes, which we're going to say is represented by the variable b for bush. So my shoes B times her 30 here equals her C, Christina's. So she has 30 times as many shoes as me. So in this case, I'm comparing the big to the small. Now if I'm writing it in a different way, I actually have 1/30th, it's more of a fraction, I have 1/30th of hers. So I take Christina's shoes, times it by the 1/30th, which is what mine represents, and that equals me. I have 1/30th as many shoes as Christina Aguilera. That is an example of a comparison problem.
Now we're going to look at a second comparison problem, and this is something you might see in Michigan, a deer, and we have rabbits. So this picture, this graph represents that we have deer represented by the variable D and rabbits by the variable R. And what you'll notice is that this smaller box for rabbits we can compare to the deer.
There you go.
Okay, sorry, I feel lost. So we have our rabbits times how many to equal deer? Well, I can see here that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So R times 5 will equal how many deer we have. Now one thing we want to be careful about is we can say that this number is 1. So 1 times 5 would equal 5 deer, or one thing we want to be careful of is this is just representing any number. So really this could be like 6 rabbits. 6 times 5 would equal 30 deer. So just something to think about. We can compare the other way around. We have 1/5 as many rabbits as deer. Okay, good.
So let's look at another one. Mrs. Van Dam's pencils compared to mine. Mrs. Van Dam has 18, and I only have 3. Man, I'm getting the short end of the stick here. I have less shoes and less pencils. So if we are going to compare these, we've got Mrs. Van Dam's pencils, which we're going to represent with our variable V, and there's 18 here, just to make it simple. My poor pencils, there's only 3. Okay? So I could say I have 3 of the 18, but that just seems a little much. But here's our questions. How many times more pencils does Mrs. Van Dam have than me? And how many less pencils do I have than her? So if we look at this and we slide my 3 up, well, that covers 3. But if I keep going and I spread those 3 out, I can see that those equal groups of 3, they spread them out all the way to the end. So we end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 groups that are equal groups of 3. So when I go to compare them, Mrs. Van Dam has 6 times as many pencils as I have. Okay? And then if we do it the flip side, where we do the smaller, I have 1/6 as many as her. So try not to get too hung up on these equations, because that's sort of where it's tricky, but look at it and just use your common sense, right?
Yes.
If I go up here, I see there's 6 equal groups, and I've only got 1 of those 6, well, that's 1/6 as many. Okay, so that's all a comparison is.
Now it is your turn to try a comparison problem. So we have here, Lisa read 9 books over the summer, and Jack read 36 books. How many times more books did Jack read? How many times less books did Lisa read? That's what you're going to want to work in your math journal on and bring back the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll notice there's a little bonus question for you too.
Who do you think's better prepared, Jack or Lisa? Again, common sense. All right, good luck.